She appeals for some compassion, not just for her family, but for others too. Daily COVID numbers hit triple digits for the first time. Right now, there's 46 Delta patients in hospital, 7 in ICU. So how will the system cope as numbers grow? And what about other treatments? Should all Vic uni students have to be vaxxed to be on campus? The government's home isolation trial gets a flood of interest, so who made the cut? And the painful wait could be over for Aucklanders waiting to see physios and dentists. Wow, light at the end of the tunnel.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Whakalofalahi atu, I'm Marama Tipole. A leading emergency medicine doctor is reassuring New Zealanders that the healthcare system will not be overrun. The number of daily COVID-19 community cases has hit triple figures for the first time, with 102 new infections. Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield has said on the current trajectory, the country can expect up to 180 COVID cases a day within 2 to 3 weeks. There are currently 46 people in hospital with the virus, including 7 in intensive care or the high dependency unit. President of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine, Dr. John Bonning, says while the sector will not implode, a surge of cases will put a lot of pressure on hospitals and healthcare workers.
It's going to be busy. It's going to be tough. We've got to divide our departments into hot and cold zones and try and protect people in both. Those with respiratory illnesses, obviously not all of them will have COVID, some will. And look, we're going to need to strap ourselves in for a wee while.
Ministers could decide this afternoon if Level 3 restrictions in Waikato can ease or if they will be extended. Of today's 102 new community cases, 8 are in Waikato. All of the Waikato cases are located near Te Awamutu, and people who travelled through or visited are being urged to get a test whether they have symptoms or not. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says the decision will be made today if the public health advice lands in time.
Ministers, when we were briefly discussing matters earlier this morning, concluded that if the Director General provided his advice to us today and we could make a decision today, then we should do that.
The decision will be announced tomorrow, if not today. Suspected anti-vaxxers have been making bogus COVID vaccination bookings in one of the least vaccinated areas of the country. The College of GPs President Sam Merton says there's been a spate of fake bookings in Tairāwhiti over the past few days, including in the lead up to Super Saturday. She says one East Coast vaccination centre had 90 in just a couple of days. Only about 74% of people in Tairāwhiti have had at least one dose of the vaccine, well below the national average. The rates were 63% for Māori. The failure of security monitoring was behind the escape of a man from an Auckland-managed isolation facility in early September. The man was able to leave the Novotel Ibis Ellerslie via a fire escape, partly because the CCTV wasn't working properly. Katie Doyle reports.
The investigation has also found a cable was plugged into the wrong port and an operator wasn't logged in, meaning the man was able to slip into the stairwell undetected. The report has made a number of recommendations around improving site security while also developing a risk profile assessment for community cases. The Joint Head of MIQ, Brigadier Rose King, said in a statement work was underway in implementing the recommendations. She said that of the more than 180,000 people who have been through MIQ since March 2020, 18 have absconded in 13 incidents.
A Palmerston North woman is pleading with health officials to be allowed to go to Auckland to help care for a terminally ill relative. Moira Spire, who is fully vaccinated, has repeatedly been denied permission to help care for her nephew Andrew and take the load off his elderly parents. The 36-year-old is dying from bowel cancer. You can hear more on this story on Checkpoint shortly. Peter Thompson is kicking himself if he didn't walk across the road and buy his lotto ticket at Countdown Pōkeno this week when he had the chance. The Manarewa local was visiting friends on Sunday and stopped at the dairy for picnic items and a lotto ticket. The dairy is right across the road from where the $42 million winning ticket was sold.
Look, I'm kicking myself. Like, was there something I really needed from there? Was there something worthwhile going in the countdown that day? I'll trust my luck to be in the same town, But buy it from the lotto store that didn't sell the winner.
Mr Thompson is celebrating his birthday today and says the winnings would have made it one to remember. The prize has not yet been claimed. It's 5:04. In sports, the Black Sticks captain Stacey Mickelson doesn't believe she's calling time on her international hockey career too early, despite only being 30. Mickelson is New Zealand's most capped women's player, having played 296 games for the Black Sticks and competing at 3 Olympics and 3 Commonwealth Games. Mickelson says it needs to be remembered she made her debut 12 years ago as a teenager.
It feels like it's been such a long time, so I definitely don't feel like I've retired early or young or anything like that at all, just because I have been so lucky to have been involved with the team for such a long time period.
New Zealand basketballer Steven Adams and his new team, the Memphis Grizzlies, have chalked up a win in their NBA season opener. The Grizzlies have beaten the Cleveland Cavaliers 132-121 in Memphis. Adams had a solid first game, scoring 8 points and pulling down a game-high 14 rebounds. The Around Lake Talbot Cycle Challenge, which attracts 5,000 riders, has been postponed until February, with organisers citing the uncertainty around hosting the November event due to COVID restrictions. And Newcastle United has urged fans to stop wearing traditional Arabic attire to football games after the English Premier League football club was bought by a Saudi Arabia-led consortium. Supporters turned up in robes and head coverings for a recent home clash against Tottenham. That's the news.
Angry at printers. Angry at supermarkets.
You're advertising a 50% markup on your window. I sold you this tin of baked beans for $1 and you've got it on the shelves for $1.80. Well, it ought to be $1.50.
Just plain angry. Applaud Auckland's COVID prevention avoidance measures, but do not allow its rule-breaking idiots, their apologists and calls to open the floodgates to screw up the rest of the country.
Keeping our cool. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And taking a look now at the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday for Northland, periods of rain, possibly heavy today for Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula. Mostly cloudy, scattered rain spreading south today, then clearing tomorrow morning. For Waitangi to Whanganui, also Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Areas of cloud, isolated showers about the central high country and ranges today. Manawatu to Wellington, areas of cloud today, otherwise fine. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly cloudy. Scattered showers about the ranges, clearing for tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough, Canterbury Plains and Otago. Areas of cloud with drizzle about coastal Otago and South Canterbury for tomorrow morning. And for the remainder of the South Island, fine apart from isolated showers about the ranges today. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower. It's 5:07.
Nā mihi marama, tēnā koutou katoa no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A Palmerston North woman is pleading for a one-way compassionate exemption to cross the Auckland border to see her terminally ill nephew in his final days. 36-year-old Andrew Spear is dying from bowel cancer that has spread through his body and he has just days to live. His aunt, Moira Spear, who lives on her own and is fully vaccinated, just wants to drive to Auckland to help Andrew and his elderly parents who are caring for him in his final days, including administering his pain relief. But despite a letter from Andrew's GP that he had just days to live and pleas from her local MP, along with National's Deputy Leader Dr Shane Reti, her requests have continued to be denied.
Medically, he's in the last days or weeks, if that much, of his life. He's now staying with his mum and dad. He has been there, staying there for the last 2 years because of his cancer. And so he's on palliative care. He doesn't have any cancer medications. He's only on painkillers now. And I was hoping he might be able to speak with you, but he finds it very difficult to actually speak for any length of time. But he's very aware that I'm speaking with you. I let him know. I talked to him just a wee bit earlier. So he's not... that's it. He's just basically getting on with each day as it comes along, giving it his best shot. And that's where he's at, really.
So I imagine it is a pretty stressful and tough time. So what is it that you want to be able to do, Moira?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's so much emotion, Lisa, involved in it. It isn't just what I can do in the sense of hey, I can go and be a big help to them. I can be, of course, because apart from just being together as we journey through this time for Andrew, it's for ourselves as well, obviously, just to be as a family and be able to just be able to love on each other, but at the same time, just to do the vacuuming or do something. I mean, to just help. I mean, life goes on, and that's been probably most people in this position feel the same. You wish the world would stop, but it doesn't. You just got to keep going, and there are things that just being there can make it. Just sitting with them and then just helping wherever I can in the house. I'm not planning on going anywhere, doing anything other than being there and just talking through the things that we need to talk through. There are simple things. I mean, he's in my will. I want to know, what does he want me to do with that? The things that I have planned for him that probably won't come to fruition the way we planned it, but what does he want to do? And there's sorts of conversations that are very difficult to have over a phone, and especially when he can't speak for any more than a sentence or two. So basically that's what I want to do. I just want to be a part of, he's been a part of, I've been a part of his life, all of his life, right from the get-go. I'm single, I don't have children. I live on my own. I don't have any family members living in Palmerston North, where I actually live. They are my closest, my next of kin. They are the people that mean the most to me. So for me, just to be here and not be able to even, and I suppose a lot of people will be the same, be able to just, give them a hug and hold them and just be together. It's just unconscionable for me. I compartmentalise myself, so that's how I manage, because I'm working from home at the moment, so that's good, and I can take that with me when I go to Auckland, so I can be there for as long as it takes, really.
So what has happened with your application to come in to Auckland on compassionate grounds?
Yeah, well, when I heard this I applied straight away, and I got a pretty much instant reply to say that it's declined because the words basically that they use based on the information you gave us, we determined your need for travelling was not essential. But you can apply again. So I did straight away and got the same reply. And then the next option is you go to the Ombudsman. But I tried applying again to them, and they came back a few days later saying, you've already applied twice, we don't look at it a third time. So at that point, I did write to the Ombudsman, and I also wrote to our local MP. I emailed him, that's Tangi Itakeri, and he was really helpful. He tried very hard to, and he came back to me instantly, and then he did what he could, and he got the same response. They can't go any further, not, from the people he spoke with. And then I approached Dr. Reti. Now,
did Dr. Reti help with an application as well?
Yes. Well, when I wrote through, I got a response from his office, and his assistant applied on my behalf with my permission. I had to sign a form to give her permission and everything. So she presented it as well, and they got it. They were declined as well, and I think they were smacked on the hand. Actually, they were getting, as his words. Shane's words on his Facebook were, they were getting tetchy with us because we were applying or trying to get some kind of understanding or, as to why they were declining, because trying to get some reasoning behind it. And I guess in those positions, or the position that he is in, they can go to places where we can never go to. We just don't get an opportunity when you fill out that form to actually express the true aspect of what's going on. They ask you generic questions and you don't have a lot of space to answer. And also, when you're in a vulnerable position, when you've just been told that news that you read in the letter about Andrew from the doctor, it's quite a difficult time to put your thoughts into answering a question which comes across as rather cold, and then you get that response, and there's nowhere to go. You just nowhere to go. You can't every case is different. Every case is individual, and I believe that I truly believe I'm no more important than anybody else, but I'm no less important either. And I think there are a lot of terminal cancers in New Zealand, not all at the stage where Andrew's at, and they need to understand that ask the questions. What does it mean not be told because I'm an auntie, I'm not close enough or I'm not important enough to go, basically, is what they're saying. They don't know my relationship to Andrew, and there's nowhere where I can express that to them. And I think Shane, Dr. Retty's office, they were able to bring that to the forefront a little bit more than I could.
Moira, are you ready to go? Have you been vaccinated? What's been happening with testing for COVID with you?
Yep, I've been double vaccinated for some time now, and I had another test yesterday. I get tested every 5 days because my bags are packed, and I've got I just live out of my suitcase at the moment. If I got the call today, I'd be off 2 in the morning. I'm going to drive straight through, and I've got it organised from work. I can, as I said, I can take my work with me, and I'll take time off to start with, of course. And for me, I've committed myself to this ongoing, regardless of the outcome with my family. I've read now, in response to Dr. Retty's Facebook page, where he put some information on me and Andrew. There's been a lot of response to that and other people in similar positions. And we've got to get this changed so that they can be heard, they can be treated like individuals and in a humane way, not to just be given a number and basically say it's not essential. I mean, it's a very sad way to deal with people, and there's going to be an ongoing effect from this. So COVID's a big thing, and I understand that, but my take is that COVID, it's here, and it's here to stay. We've got to learn to, handle that. But there's a big picture with COVID, and that big picture is made up of individuals and families that do need to be cared for, because Andrew's suffering from cancer, but the family also goes through the reality of that, as do many other families. And as a result of that, there's going to be, not necessarily in my case, and I hope not, but there's going to be a lot of mental health issues coming from this, because I don't know how people deal with not being able to be with their family.
And so he's incredibly sick, but he's been doing his bit in the fight against COVID as well, hasn't he? Tell us about, is he vaccinated, for example?
Yeah, and I think that was another thing. He had his first vaccination some time ago, and then last Friday he went in and had his second vaccination. And he did that, you think, I mean, that kind of got me going when he told me that, but or when his dad told me that, because he wanted to get help to be a part of getting those numbers up, so that this sort of thing, we can have an easier way to be together, and for the whole purpose of what that was about, getting New Zealand going again. But his take, and he wanted to do his part, and so, I mean, and he suffered from that for quite a few days later, just because of having to get up and go out. But he did it, and yay to him, I think, good. So can't we give something back to people like him? Just if all it is a visit from me, being there, who's someone who's COVID-free, coming from an area that's COVID-free, driving straight through and not going anywhere else. And I mean, I know that some people break the rules, but most of us will never do that.
What would this is an impossible question I'm about to ask you, but please, what would it mean to Andrew and you to be together one more time before he dies?
Well, it possibly, sorry, it makes this, you know, the tears that I see right now, it makes it sort of more, it makes it real for me in the sense that I'm there with him, and rather than have to have it in your mind all the time, what's happening, what's happened, how is he doing, how's he feeling, I could be right there with him.
And MB has declined 2 compassionate requests from Moira Spear, despite supporting letters from her nephew's GP and letters from her local MP and Dr Shane Reti. The Ombudsman is now investigating. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What's family? Is it an aunt? Is it a cousin? Is it a parent? Where are the boundaries here? And it's a one-way exemption that Moira is after. She's prepared to come into Auckland and stay put until level 3 is gone and the border around Auckland is gone also. She'll stay here as long as it takes, she says. Let us know if you're facing a similar situation or you've been declined a compassionate exemption to travel into Auckland. Pātui mai you can text me on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai. Haere ake nei. Coming up, listen up Aucklanders, a treat. You can go back to regular dental checks at level 3. Daily COVID numbers have hit triple figures today with 102 cases recorded in the community. 94 of them are in Auckland and 8 in Waikato. 40 of today's cases are so far unlinked. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says while they've been clear about the likelihood of an increasing number of cases, he acknowledges it's not always easy.
And the ups and downs can be a bit of an emotional roller coaster. You will have heard from all of us who've spoken from here recently that we can expect to see case numbers rise. We do still want to keep them under control and we're working hard to do that, and we thank Aucklanders for their cooperation in doing so, and as we head towards the long weekend, do ask Aucklanders to continue to stick to those alert level 3 rules.
The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says on the current trajectory, New Zealand can expect up to 180 cases a day within 2 to 3 weeks. He says the number of these cases that end up in hospital will depend on how many people have been vaccinated. While Northland has returned to level 2, parts of Waikato, along with Auckland, remains at level 3. All of today's Waikato cases are located near Te Awamutu, and people who travelled through or visited are being urged to get a test whether they have symptoms or not. Grant Robertson says while more cases are still likely, he's relatively optimistic the virus can be brought under control in that region.
Our attempt by having the measures we've got in place in the Waikato is to be able to continue to try to stamp out this outbreak, and we're taking the approach we're taking because we believe we can do that.
Ministers may also decide tonight if restrictions on Waikato can ease or if they'll stay in level 3 over the long weekend. The announcement was due tomorrow, but Grant Robertson says they'll make their decision public as early as possible to give some surety to the people of Waikato. Suspected anti-vaxxers have been making bogus vaccination bookings in one of the most unprotected areas of the country. They've been targeting Tairawhiti, where only 74% of people have had at least one dose and just 63% of Māori. The College of GPs President Sam Merton told health correspondent Rowan Quinn one small clinic in Tairawhiti had about 90 fake bookings in just a few days.
Well, it's very distressing for people when they're trying to book in and they can't get a booking, and then the booking would have been available, but it hasn't been filled. And then also you're wasting vaccine potentially, and so that's also very distressing because there is a limited resource, and even if the resource was lots of it, you're wasting resource, which is not good. And then you've got staff who are ready and waiting to start doing some vaccination and no one's turning up. So it has an impact on all sorts of people and is really detrimental to those who are really keen to get a vaccination when there's no bookings available for them.
And Tairawhiti, so I guess they've struggled with some of their vaccination rates in parts of there. So, I mean, is this creating another barrier to people who might have been like, this is the day I'm going to get vaccinated, and then can't?
Yeah, and I think for places where people are stretched and they have limited availability. If on the day that they are available to get a vaccine, then there's no bookings because it's filled up with people who are not actually going to turn up for it, then that's all fake names, then that's really devastating, and devastating especially in those small areas where there's vulnerable people, and where there's a whole lot of effort put in trying to get people to get vaccinated, and to the people who's trying to book in, it just looks like, oh, this is just hopeless. And how many times do you try when the bookings get filled up all the time? So it is very distressing, and especially when it's potentially vulnerable people who are missing out. I'm just surprised that it's all very well for someone to have an opinion for themselves about vaccination, but then when you start creating difficulties for others to have their vaccination, that's a different ballgame. That's the next level. And so I think, we're all entitled to a choice. We're all entitled to our own opinion, but actually your choice and opinion shouldn't be causing harm to others. And that's what this is doing, is potentially causing harm to others.
And is there anything you can do to try to find out who's behind this?
Well, I think, to my mind, I'd be getting a bit forensic with it and looking at IP addresses and people who are doing these sorts of things, because I think it's probably illegal activity, I would expect. But and so, yeah, I would be keen on people to sort of investigate it a bit further and see where those bookings are coming from, and take some action.
Do you think it's
possible.
something that the police should get involved with?
I think the police could get involved. It may be more effort than they have time for, but I think if it is a big, I can't imagine that there's enough numbers. So there may be a small number of people who are creating these bogus names, and if it is a few people doing it, then I think it would be good to get on top of it.
Sam Merton from the College of GPs there. The Ministry of Health says it's investigating a small number of fake bookings to its national system and says it's extremely disappointing and irresponsible behaviour. It is almost 27 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. New Zealand's secured an historic free trade agreement with the United Kingdom that will eventually eliminate all tariffs on New Zealand exports. Industry leaders have welcomed the agreement, saying it'll give New Zealand products a competitive edge in the UK market. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
Hi, good morning, Jacinda. I don't know what time of day it is with you. Kia ora.
The UK's Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, speaking to New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern on the eve of today's historic free trade deal, opting for a rugby analogy.
This is a big moment for the UK and for our partnership with New Zealand, and we're absolutely thrilled that we seem to have driven for the line. We've scrummed down, we've packed tight, and we've got the ball over the line, and we have a deal.
Jacinda Ardern equally chuffed.
I believe this is an agreement that we can both be rightly proud of. Unlike a rugby match, I think we can literally both come off the field feeling like winners in this occasion.
The deal will wipe tariffs on 97% of New Zealand exports, including honey, wine, onions and hoki, the day it comes into effect. It will take 5 years for tariffs to fully come off all dairy products and 15 for sheep meat and beef. While this longer time frame is disappointing for the Meat Industry Association, its chief executive, Surma Karapiva, says it's still a good deal.
You never know what sort of deals have to be done to get the deal across the line in its entirety. At the end of the day, we will see tariff elimination in year 15.
It's estimated New Zealand exporters will save $38 million a year, removing $14 million worth of tariffs for the wine industry, our largest export to the UK alone. The agreement also recognises Te Tiriti o Waitangi and will include a dedicated Indigenous chapter for future cooperation on issues of importance to Māori. British High Commissioner Laura Clark says this recognises the historic relationship between both countries.
The UK is the original treaty partner. Now, of course, the New Zealand Crown having taken on all responsibilities regarding the treaty. But we really wanted to recognise the strength of those connections between the Māori and the UK.
It's a move Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rawiri Waititi welcomes.
Anything that will help the growth of this country, especially Indigenous interactions internationally, as the whakaputanga in 1935 and 1835 promised us, then I'm all for it.
An agreement to extend and improve working holiday arrangements has also been made, alongside the trade deal. Jacinda Ardern says this could be similar to the deal Australia struck with the UK, which allows people up to the age of 35 to spend 3 years living and working in either country. She says this will build on a long-standing tradition of the UK OE.
I was a benefactor of that scheme, travelling to the UK in 2006 to work for the Civil Service, so it's an area of particular interest of mine. These changes will improve the access that young New Zealanders will have in the years to come to live and work in the UK, a key priority that was identified in public consultations about an FTA with the UK.
The deal is the second the UK has struck post-Brexit, the first being with Australia. It's hoped the agreement can be finalised this year.
A lot of you are getting in touch about our earlier interview with Moira Spear, who is desperate to get an exemption to come to Auckland and stay in Auckland to see her 36-year-old nephew, who is living out his final days. He has terminal bowel cancer, but she's been declined an exemption. This listener says, "This is heartbreaking. I can't believe how inhumane this decision is. How could this possibly be declined?" And Shanlo has said, "This story about the young man who's dying and the aunt who wants to see him is so heartbreaking. What possible reason can the government have for refusing such a request? I am gobsmacked." Another from Matilda, "What a beautiful, articulate, brave woman. You have my full and utter support to be with your nephew. This situation is very unfair. Ngā mihi nui," says Matilda. And another one, "Aroha nui to Moira. My sister died in her 30s from cancer. Those last times are so important." Do keep your feedback coming on this issue. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. What's the definition of close family? Who should be allowed compassionate exemptions? We would love to hear from you. Kia ora e te iwi e haere aki nei I a Checkpoint. Manawa two health officials on how they're busting myths to get vaccines into arms. New job, new home. The new Governor-General, Dame Cindy Kero, checks into Government House. And the brains behind the original jab cab idea. Homai o whakaaro, we'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. The text is 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's always email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. The healthcare system is expecting to be put under pressure, but not likely to be overrun with the increasing COVID-19 numbers. The number of daily community cases has hit triple figures for the first time today, with 102 new infections. And the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says on the current trajectory, the country can expect up to 180 COVID cases a day within 2 to 3 weeks. But the president of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine, John Bonning, says while the sector will not implode, a surge of cases will put a lot of pressure on hospitals and healthcare workers. There are currently 46 people in hospital with the virus, including 7 receiving high-level care. A decision on level 3 restrictions in Waikato could be made later today. 8 of today's new community cases are in the region. All of the Waikato cases are located near Te Awamutu, and people who travelled through or visited are being urged to get a test whether they have symptoms or not. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says ministers will make a decision today if the public health advice lands in time. A spate of fake bookings for COVID-19 vaccinations in Tairāwhiti over the last few days are believed to have been made by anti-vaxxers. The College of GPs President Sam Merton says one East Coast vaccination centre had 90 in just a couple of days last week. Only about 74% of people in the region have had at least one dose of the vaccine, well below the national average. The Joint Head of Managed Isolation says work is already underway in implementing recommendations from a report that concluded a failure in security monitoring helped a man escape from a facility last month. The man was able to leave the Novotel Ibis Ellerslie via a fire escape, partly because the CCTV wasn't working properly, while an operator was not logged into the system. Brigadier Rose King says that of the more than 180,000 people who have been through MIQ since March 2020, 18 have absconded in 13 separate incidents. Those are the headlines. We'll have our news and sport update at 6.
Nā mihi marama, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa I nai ko Nona Peltier, who's in our Auckland newsroom to talk business. Well, Nona, I'm going to expect the text machine to blow up after this next discussion. The two main supermarket chains, right, they are united in their view that the grocery market is competitive and they're not earning excessive profits. So what sparked this, this expression of unity?
Well, it's an interesting one. It's day one of the Commerce Commission's hearings into the whole market, the grocery market, looking at whether or not there is an unfair advantage for Woolworths and foodstuffs that operate in the market primarily. They're the big ones. They're going to do a review. They've opened up the sessions to the public and other experts and so forth. So this was day one. It was about the nature of competition, and the two big grocers said there's plenty of competition, and then went about listing off a number, including, for example, even the Chemist Warehouse that sells, for example, toothpaste and toilet paper, etc. And tomorrow we're going to hear more. We're going to hear about pricing and promotional practices, loyalty programs, and it's going to go on. We're going to have about 9 to 10 sessions over the next 7 days. So there'll be a lot of, water under the bridge by the time all of this has been heard. Yeah, it should be interesting times.
And Auckland Airport, it says global air travel will recover, but it isn't too sure about the timing. I mean, what is it expecting?
Well, the International Air Travel Association, that's known as IATA, they're expecting global travel to fully recover in 2023. Now, Auckland Airport is
2023, Nona.
Well, that's an optimistic outlook. And Auckland Airport say they're taking a much more conservative view. They're not so sure that that's going to happen. They think the recovery is going to take a little longer, but one day it will be fully recovered. And when it does, you can expect more sustainable type of activity in the air travel business. Well, how that plays out, we don't know yet. But one thing I found very interesting from the annual report today, an annual report to the shareholders, Auckland Airport said that to give some perspective of where international passenger volumes are now, there's an average of 960 passengers per day in September. And that's less than half the number of daily passengers that moved through the airport in 1966. That's the year it opened.
Wow. Okay, Nona, strap on your running shoes. Let's take a jog around the market.
Okay, well, there's not a lot to say except that the New Zealand dollar is trading at a 5-month high against the US dollar at 72.1 US cents, and that's in line with movements in Australia and in Canada. And it's steady at 95.7 Australian and 52.1 British pence, and the NZX Top 50 Index, it rose just 12 points to 13,126.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier with business there. And a group of lucky businesses have been chosen for a government trial that will see them bypass MIQ and isolate at home when returning from overseas travel. 605 businesses applied for just 150 spots. They have to meet strict criteria, including having somewhere to stay alone, no shared ventilation systems, so that means no apartments. The property has to be within a 50-kilometre radius of Christchurch or Auckland International Airport. And travellers need to return to one of those cities on a direct international flight by the 8th of December this year. Successful applicants were told last Friday, and one of them is Mark Ulrich, the director of UMC, an engineering company that sells wire fabrication machinery to the fencing industry around the world. And Mark joins me now. Mark, when they gave you the call, did you think you'd won the Willy Wonka ticket?
Oh, yes. Well, good evening, Lisa. Yes, I did, actually. It was, we got an email to say that we'd been successful and, felt very fortunate.
So tell us, what is the plan that you've submitted, broad brushstrokes? How are you going to do this?
Look, I'm planning on leaving on the 1st of November for a month and then coming back to isolate for the first 2 weeks of December. My family's going to move out and I'm going to move in. So that's it, in a quick summary. As I say, I feel very, very lucky. It's going to cause a little bit of disruption around with the school finishing and those sorts of things with the children, but we'll work through that.
Yeah, so how easy is it to meet the criteria?
Well, one of the things that for Christchurch-based businesses is having to fly directly into Christchurch. Now, I'm going to be in the United States prior to coming back, so that creates logistically, a bit of an issue on how to get here. So I'm actually looking at flying from Los Angeles to Singapore, which is about 18 hours, and then catch the flight from Singapore into Christchurch. So it's a roundabout way, but at least it means we can do what we need to do.
So it's only you from your company. Would you have preferred more spots? And I mean, how many people would you normally dispatch overseas for business trips?
Oh, look, we could easily have 3 people over at any time overseas in different parts of the world, from technicians to, salespeople to, myself. So, look, we didn't want to apply for more. We thought if we were lucky enough to get one, we'll leave some space for others.
So remind us again, why do you need to travel offshore? Because I know a lot of people will go, hey, mate, why can't you just use the Zoom machine?
Well, look, almost 100% of our business is overseas, and it's a relationship-based sale, really. These are very expensive machines worth millions of dollars, and you need to build up, trust with your potential customer. They need to actually have access to meet you or to see your machinery or those sorts of things. And with that, we can't bring people in, which is what we would typically do also. So we have to go out to them. And as I said last time, I think we've had numerous calls that have sort of stopped dead because, we just, the first-time inquiries, they're reputable firms, but they're not willing to pull the trigger on this gear until they can get some more sort of certainty. And until we can sit in front of them, they're not satisfied.
Mark, you mentioned trust there, and you're still waiting to hear back about what kind of reporting that you're going to be subject to during your 14 days in isolation. But when it comes to trust, can we trust you to abide by the rules? Because, that's what the rest of New Zealand is going to be worried about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, fair question. Look, as I say, we're one of the lucky ones. We're not going to do anything to jeopardise, what's the hard work that's been put in down here. But it is trust, and I don't know what I can say to make people comfortable with that. But look, as I say, we just need to be able to get out and do what we do. And if we're given that opportunity, we're not going to let anyone down by not playing by the rules. When back here, that's for sure.
What do you hope's going to come from this trial?
Well, firstly, I'm a little bit disappointed it's taken 18 months to get the trial, but and I'm not actually sure what they're hoping to see from it, whether they're just testing their systems to see if it's possible or not. But, I'm hoping that it's going to really open things up for New Zealand businesses because we're doing it really tough. Like really, really tough. And, we've got this innovative culture, this number 8 sort of mentality, and we get on and find solutions for customers. But when customers are asking you for a solution and you're telling them, I could potentially give you one, but my problem is I can't get back to my own country at the end of the trip, they're quite dumbfounded by it, really.
Really appreciate your time, Mark, and we'll check in with you after you've finished your trial. That is Mark Ulrich, who's the director of UMC, and it's a company that makes massive fabrication machinery. As he said, his main market is offshore. He's part of that pilot into home isolation, 150 places there, 605 businesses applied. People who have waited patiently and often painfully for weeks in lockdown are finally able to access face-to-face care from dentists, physios and other allied health professionals. The government's relaxed level 3 rules affecting 2,000 practitioners in Auckland alone across 43 professions. Sam Ollie reports.
A sigh of relief as more allied health workers are allowed to operate under level 3. They include dietitians, chiropractors, occupational therapists, physios, psychologists, podiatrists, optometrists and dental therapists. Today's decision comes after weeks of frustration among these providers in Waikato and Tāmaki Makaurau and a petition with 13,000 signatures. Director General of Health Dr Ashley Bloomfield was asked why they couldn't open up earlier.
Early on in an outbreak, when certainly in Auckland we were trying to effectively stamp it out and get back to zero, the controls under Alert Level 4 and the first part of Alert Level 3 were designed to minimise contact between health professionals and people as much as possible. It's now reached a point, and certainly talking with our DHB colleagues up there, that enabling access to some of these allied health services in the community will help with conditions progressing to a point where they might need hospital care.
Mount Eden physio Patrick Peng's patients have been in agony awaiting hands-on care.
I didn't realise how bad it was until I started practising again. Like the 4 or 5 patients I've seen since we've been allowed to see face-to-face people, they have all been so dysfunctional, in so much pain, and they've just been so grateful that they've been able to get treatment again.
His colleague, practice manager Amy Shishka, says telehealth consultations have given limited help.
The hardest thing when we had basically been told we can't see anybody face to face was dealing with the messages, the emails, the phone calls from patients that were desperate to see you. And we basically had to say, there's nothing we can do for you.
Mount Roskill dentist Dr Michael Thompson is pleased oral and dental therapists can get back to business. He hopes this will make a big difference to the backlog of children they've been unable to see.
Children's dental disease at the moment has been quite high over the last few years, and so any kind of lockdown pushes back procedures that the children were booked in for. A lot of children have missed their regular check-up appointments, so certain problems tend to get worse. So we are seeing more children with dental infections, problems that have just been left for a bit too long.
Allied health workers opening up must still screen patients, socially distance where possible, and wear PPE.
It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muri ake ina pitapita kōrero. After the news at 6, 3 months on from severe flooding, Westport residents want to know when they can go home. With the country recording triple-figure cases for the first time since COVID arrived in New Zealand, the focus is going on how the health system will cope with Delta firmly entrenched in the community. There are 46 people in hospital with the virus at the moment and 7 are in ICU or a high dependency unit. But some say while the short-term surge will be tough, it's the future that needs some serious consideration. Kate Gregan reports.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. That message from Dr Paul Young, a professor of intensive care medicine and an ICU doctor. 102 new community cases today and a Delta outbreak that shows no sign of slowing. The pressure on the health system is great. Dr Young says for now, the system will cope.
For a short-term surge, we will do whatever we need to do. We will adapt and we will compromise until we've used every piece of equipment that we have available. That'll just involve spreading staff thinner and thinner. And we can do that for a short period of time, and indeed we expect to. But we can't operate under an emergency surge model for an indefinite period of time.
He says his biggest concern is New Zealand's ability to look after an additional burden of patients every single day for the next year. He says a COVID-19 surge will see hospitals enter emergency mode, meaning they'll have to scale back procedures in order to cope with an influx.
And that will mean cancelling elective cardiac surgery and elective cancer surgery that requires intensive care and operating under an emergency model for a very sustained period of time, which will have serious consequences for patients and mean that we see worse outcomes for critically ill patients, not just with COVID, but with every condition that puts people into an intensive care unit.
His views are echoed by Tanya Mitchell, the chair of the New Zealand College of Critical Care Nurses, who says healthcare workers are preparing for a disease that will remain for the foreseeable future.
Longer term, it's much harder to maintain from a workforce burnout point of view, but also from a capacity point of view. And we find now that we often don't have enough intensive care beds, and we end up postponing surgery until there is an availability of an ICU bed and a qualified intensive care nurse to look after the patient. So that will just be exacerbated.
But not everyone agrees. Dr John Bonine, an emergency physician and president of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine, says the sector is not going to implode.
It's going to be busy. It's going to be tough. We've got to divide our departments into hot and cold zones and try and protect people in both. Those with respiratory illnesses, obviously not all of them will have COVID, some will. And look, it's going to be tough. We're going to need to strap ourselves in for a wee while. It's going to be tough on staff, and we've got to make sure we get the appropriate amount of staff in. So there's a lot of pieces of this puzzle.
Tanya Mitchell says nurses up and down the country are waiting for COVID patients to burst through hospital doors.
We are as ready as we can be for that, but there is a nervous anticipation of what that involves for not only our workforce and our colleagues, but also the patients. We don't want to see a large number of patients needing to be critically ill and in hospital, and some will be dying from having COVID.
Meanwhile, all three experts agree the country is in desperate need of more nurses. They want the government to incentivise New Zealand nurses based overseas to come home.
A growing number of workplaces are considering bringing in COVID vaccine mandates. The Warehouse Group has begun consulting with staff about a directive for staff to be vaccinated. Victoria University in Wellington has already mandated vaccines for students and staff working in residential halls and is now looking at going further than that. Vice-Chancellor Professor Grant Guilford joins us now. Can you tell us what option you're looking at? Are you thinking all students on campus should be vaccinated?
We're beginning to explore that option, Lisa. So we've gone through a risk assessment on the halls of residence, which is a particular situation on the campus of high risk, made the decision that COVID vaccination is a requirement in this era of the Delta variant to protect our staff and our students in that particular environment. So the next step now for us is to undertake consultation and a risk assessment of the broader university environment, which of course is not quite as intensive as that of the halls of residence, but it does have periods of close interactions and lecture theatres and face-to-face interactions between our staff and the public. So that's where we're up to now.
Have you had legal advice on it?
Yes, we have. We've had some good guidance on our obligations under the Health and Safety at Work Act and also the new Pastoral Care Code of Practice.
So do you reckon you could get away with it without some legal comeback?
There might be legal comeback, but we're of a view that this is the right thing to do. It's pretty straightforward, the risk analysis, and you're going to have legal comeback either way you manage this. We would certainly have legal comeback if we did not do all that was practical to protect our students and staff, and we had fatalities because of COVID. So we feel it's far better from our own ethical values to get on the front foot with this.
So your preference would be to have all staff on campus and all students on campus vaccinated and required to be vaccinated?
We're not to that point yet. The halls of residence decision has been made. We have to go through a very careful risk assessment process for the wider university and a careful consultative process with our staff and students to get to that point of a decision. But certainly that's the direction of travel that we're taking at the moment.
It could work for you, couldn't it? Could make you more attractive as a university, potentially.
The feedback so far has been overwhelmingly positive. People do see this as the right thing to do to protect students and to protect staff, and that's from our student bodies and our unions and our individual staff and parents and the like. So I think it is the right thing to do by way of our community.
If you went ahead with this grant, would it mean that you could only have students enrolled if they are vaccinated, or could you have a provision where you have remote learning for some students who can't or won't be vaccinated?
Yes, exactly. So under the epidemic notice, the universities are required to have online learning provisions. And so it wouldn't be a decision about whether someone can study with us or not. It would just be a decision about whether they could come onto the campus or live in our halls of residence or not. So our education would still be available to learners, and of course they'd also have the choice about going somewhere else if other universities don't make those same decisions as us.
When do you need to make the call by, Grant?
Well, for the halls we've gone now because we're starting to appoint our residential assistants right now, and it's far easier that before they accept those contracts, they are aware of our requirements so they can make an informed judgment. And it's the same for the students applying to our halls. That's happening right now.
And the broader campus, when would you have to make a decision about that?
That would be later in this year, so November, December, we would be making that decision for trimester 1 of next year, which begins late February.
Do you reckon it would be easy enough to enforce and check up on if you go with that policy across the campus?
It will be challenging. So it would have to be a high trust model. We wouldn't be planning to check everybody. We would be asking our staff and students to declare that they have had the vaccination and to provide evidence of that. And as we go forward towards that date in February, we're imagining that that's going to get a bit easier with the sort of things that the government has been talking about with regard to vaccine certificates and passports and the like.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. That is Vice-Chancellor Professor Grant Guilford on Vic Uni there, considering options for mandatory vaccination across the broader campus. Beating misinformation could hold the key to lifting the lagging Māori vaccination rate in the Greater Manawatu region. Regional Councillor in Rangitani Iwi, Kaumātua, Wiremu Te Awe Awe, says some people have been sucked in by wrong information about the COVID vaccine. Our Manawatu reporter Jimmy Allingham has more.
It's a fight against hesitancy that city leaders face in Palmerston North. Regional Councillor Wiremu Te Awe Awe says that needs to be overcome in the drive to hit the 90% target, and direct action is needed to reach those who aren't vaccinated.
We need to perhaps visit them one-on-one, probably very much similar to what they did up in Auckland with the island community. And let's go to the community directly, encourage those ones in their homes. And, you know, because some of them believe the misinformation that's going around.
The latest figures show 83% of eligible people within the Mid-Central District Health Board's boundaries have received their first vaccine, and 64% are fully vaccinated. Rates for Māori in the region, which includes Palmerston North, Otaki, Manawatu and Tararua, are lagging behind at 65.7% and 44.8% respectively. The rates are close to the national average, but Mid-Central was one of several health boards Associate Health Minister Penny Henare singled out as needing to do better to increase the Māori rate. As vaccines become mandatory for many jobs and industries, Te Awe Awe says Māori need to mobilise.
We need to get into the Māori networks, and the networks are there. I mean, if they have a tangi, they know where the networks are and a lot of those people. So, and perhaps we need to be going the extra mile to encourage our people to get the jab.
The Health Board has gone to farming sales days, run evening clinics, and has set up a vaccination clinic in the middle of Palmerston North's busiest shopping zone, the Plaza Mall. At the centre, Adele Small, the board's iwi and Māori engagement lead, says she's confident of hitting the 90% target for Māori in the region.
We just need to keep doing what we're doing and keep engaging with our communities to understand why they may not have presented at this stage of the program for their vaccine. Is it about access? How can we get it closer to them? And then if it's about hesitancy, how are we having those robust conversations with them, with people that they know and trust?
When RNZ visited the mall this week, Elaine Skipper called in for her first vaccination. The 56-year-old Māori says she was initially hesitant for religious reasons, but changed her mind.
I've been thinking about it for the last 3 weeks or so, and I had to do something in the mall here, so I walked past and I thought, why not? So I got it done.
Sitting in the city square outside, 26-year-old Taryn Stephenson isn't vaccinated, but plans to turn up to the shopping centre clinic soon to get his first shot.
I'm still so young, and I'm intending on going into UCOL next year to get into the mental health and wellbeing sector of life, and I know it's mandatory now, and I also want to travel later on in life, so it's a massive holdback, you know, if I haven't been vaccinated.
37-year-old Catherine Smith is also unvaccinated, but after initial hesitancy has decided to get her shots.
I'm not vaccinated yet, but I am planning to be. I had just been waiting until I was sure because I had a lot of conflicting information, but because I work in retail and my children are in daycare, I'll be getting it done here in Palmy sometime soon.
The shopping centre clinic is seeing about 100 people a day. The DHB is targeting specific sections of the community, such as truck drivers or meat workers who work long hours or would have difficulty travelling to a vaccination site.
A flood of you are getting in touch about our earlier interview with Moira Spear. She's in Palmerston North, wants to come one way to Auckland, an exemption to get over the border to see her 36-year-old nephew, Andrew, who is terminally ill with bowel cancer and is, he's not got long to live, matter of days. This listener says, please let this woman go to see her nephew, double-vaxxed, COVID-free. These people need to be together in those last moments. Get it together, New Zealand. Moira's had at least 2 applications for a compassionate exemption rejected. Michael says the government needs to bring their civil servants to heel when it comes to what you're discussing now, are a dying person getting help across a border. And Tim says, just listened to Moira, very moving, can't help but reflect on the exemption given by MB to a film crew last weekend to travel out of Auckland to go to Wellington for the Vaxathon. Really necessary, says Tim? Yet people such as Moira declined repeatedly. Lack of logic and compassion speaks volume. Now, just to be clear, Moira wants to go one way, only into Auckland. She's prepared to stay there until the border is lifted from Auckland. She's not expecting to go back to Palmerston North anytime soon.
RNZ News, good evening. At 6 o'clock, I'm Marama T. Pole. As the people of Waikato wait to hear whether they'll remain in level 3 or not, the Deputy Prime Minister says they believe the virus can still be contained there. Out of the 102 new community cases reported today, 8 were in Waikato. All of the Waikato cases are located near Te Awamutu, and people who travelled through or visited are being urged to get a test whether they have symptoms or not. Grant Robertson says while more cases are still likely, he believes it's still possible to contain COVID in the region.
Our attempt by having the measures we've got in place in the Waikato is to be able to continue to try to stamp out this outbreak, and we're taking the approach we're taking because we believe we can do that.
Grant Robertson says the decision about alert levels will be announced today if the public health advice lands in time. The Nurses Organisation says New Zealand is dangerously underprepared for what seems an inevitable tsunami of community COVID cases. They say a surge of patients could completely break the country's health system, adding that nurses must be a part of all proposed solutions. Kai Whakahaere Keri Nuku says nurses are a highly skilled workforce and have risen to ever-increasing demands, but they're already burnt out and seriously understaffed. It's hoped a large backlog of children needing dental care will be reduced with Alert Level 3 restrictions relaxed for health providers. Oral and dental therapists are among the 43 professions allowed to see more patients face-to-face. The government's decision affects more than 2,000 practitioners in Auckland alone. Mount Roskill dentist Michael Thompson says children's dental health has deteriorated over lockdown.
A lot of children have missed their regular checkup appointments, so certain problems tend to get worse. So we are seeing more children with dental infections, problems that have just been left for a bit too long.
Health practitioners must still screen patients, socially distance where possible, and use PPE. The government is refusing to allow the aunt of a man with terminal cancer into Auckland to see him before he dies. 36-year-old Andrew Spear has just days to live at his parents' home in Auckland. His auntie Moira is double vaccinated and lives in Palmerston North, where there are no COVID cases. She's been declined a one-way request to come into Auckland to see him and stay with the family. MB has declined both her requests for compassionate entry, which included a letter from Andrew's GP and National Deputy Leader Dr. Shane Reti and her local MP. Suspected anti-vaxxers have been making bogus COVID vaccination bookings in one of the least protected areas of the country. Tairāwhiti has been targeted, causing people to miss out on appointments and vaccines to go to waste. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
The College of GPs says one small vaccination centre had about 90 bogus bookings over a few days. President Sam Merton says the vaccine, which spoils easily, could have gone to waste, and people may have given up after struggling to get a spot, which is devastating in a vulnerable community. Only about 74% of people in Tairāwhiti have had at least one dose of the vaccine, and 63% of Māori, well below the national average. The Ministry of Health says it's had a small number of fake bookings on its national register and is investigating.
The Mayor of Auckland says there's enough certainty that water restrictions will not need to be introduced in the near future. The Auckland Council's governing body voted unanimously today to lift the final restrictions put in place since May last year, and residents can soon use the long-band sprinklers. After particularly wet weather, the dams have risen from 60% full in July to 93% now. Mayor Phil Goff says the high dam levels and new water supply established over the last 18 months have provided certainty. The National Party's hailing the new trade deal with the United Kingdom as a winner for New Zealand. Eventually eliminating all tariffs on New Zealand exports, the free trade deal is estimated to save local exporters about $38 million a year. Tariffs on 97% of New Zealand's existing exports, including wine and honey, will be removed the day it comes into effect. It'll be 5 years before all tariffs are fully gone on dairy products and 15 for sheep, meat and beef. National leader Judith Collins says it's good news.
When we look at picking winners out of this, we understand that whenever our exporters do well, that's more money, more coming into New Zealand, and that is a good thing. So I think I'd like to say we all are winners out of it.
The government's hoping to finalise the deal by the end of the year. It's 6:05. The Black Caps coach Gary Stead is brushing off T20 World Cup warm-up losses to Australia and England, believing New Zealand's got just what they needed out of the games in the UAE. They lost to England by 13 runs in their final warm-up match this morning after a narrow loss to Australia. But Stead says those two matches and a win over the Netherlands last weekend were about getting everyone match time and used to the heat and humidity. The Black Caps tournament opener is against Pakistan on Wednesday next week. The Auckland golfer Ryan Fox is in a holiday mood heading into his last event of the European Tour, which starts tonight in Spain. Fox is coming off his best result of the year, a fourth-place finish at the Andalusia Masters last weekend. He says the thought of returning home next week has him very relaxed going into the Mallorca Open.
After playing well last week, I feel like I can almost take the foot off the gas a little bit this week. I know that sounds bad, but it's the last event of the year. I've played a lot of golf, so having a little bit of a break and taking it easy might be actually good for the golf game.
Wayne Bennett has been named as the first coach of the North Brisbane Dolphins NRL expansion club, which will join the competition in 2023. And English Premier League football sides Manchester United have both scored Champions League group stage wins, with United sneaking past Italian side Atalanta 3-2 and Chelsea beating Swedish club Malmo 4-0. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Emmeline Payet-Dahlstrom updates us on plans to get humans back to the moon. That's right, back to the moon. Pulp culture professor Lorna Piatti-Fennell explains what the fuss over Halloween and the Day of the Dead is all about. Our changing world is crunching data, the ways we use and misuse it. And this week's overseas correspondent Silva Tamba is on the line from Estonia. It's all on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland, periods of rain possibly heavy today. Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula, mostly cloudy. Scattered rain spreading south, then clearing tomorrow morning. Waitongo to Whanganui, also Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Areas of cloud, isolated showers about the central high country and ranges. For Manawatu to Wellington, areas of cloud, otherwise fine. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly cloudy, scattered showers about the ranges, clearing tomorrow afternoon. For Marlborough, Canterbury Plains and Otago, areas of cloud with drizzle about coastal Otago and South Canterbury tomorrow morning. And for the remainder of the South Island, fine, apart from isolated showers about the ranges. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower. It's 6:08.
Kia ora rā e hoa, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Aucklanders may not be able to go anywhere at the moment, but some good news. Sprinklers are back, and so is a long hot shower, with water restrictions being lifted this weekend. Tighter rules for water use were put in place in May last year when the region's dams fell to low levels due to drought and continuing dry weather. Now, with dams at 93% full, Auckland Council's governing body has loosened the tap. Chin Liu reports.
Water restrictions, which currently prevent the use of sprinklers but allow hoses fitted with trigger nozzles, have been in place since May last year. But with good rainfall last month, the dam levels have risen by over 30% since July. Here is Watercare's Board Chair Margaret Devlin.
We're entering the summer period in a much stronger position than we were in the last two summer periods. So, just to reiterate that the dams are now currently at 93.3 and rising at about 0.2% per day.
Some Aucklanders, such as Amaria Wade, are happy to have more water freedom.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, because we got a boat at home, so it's cool to be able to wash the boat now. The kids playing in the water. It'll be good for them.
But some others are a bit concerned about too much freedom will put the city on strain again.
We saw how low water levels got last year, so I think that right now the best thing to do is to be quite restrictive and cautious.
I still don't think it's right. Coming into summer, it's just going to drop it. It should be sensible all year round and keep us in a good position.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says dam levels are now above normal, and with new water supply established over the last 18 months, there is enough certainty that restrictions will not return in the near future.
We can go into this summer and autumn without the prospect of having to re-establish restrictions on water use.
Phil Goff says Aucklanders have saved more than 20 billion litres of water over the last 17 months, and restricting sprinklers alone couldn't have achieved this. He encourages people keep water conservation in mind.
Our message very clearly to everybody is please keep up the good habits that you've developed in not wasting water. Why would you keep those good habits up? Well, of course it's good for the environment, but it's also good for your back pocket because you're saving money by not wasting water.
North Shore Ward Councillor Richard Hughes says the council has worked with Watercare to reduce leaks and increase efficiency of water use at new builds. He says when some other water restrictions were lifted late last year, Aucklanders' water use hasn't changed much, sometimes staying well below the conservation targets. Mr. Hughes says that shows people start to look at water differently, realising it's precious.
Although this has been a terrible time, both in COVID and water, I think it will lead us to a better future in protecting our water sources, but also preparing for climate change. So little silver linings within what has been a tough road.
Mayor Phil Goff says the council is working on a water strategy, which ultimately will look at the reutilisation of wastewater to ensure sustainability.
More than 3 months after severe flooding in Westport damaged hundreds of homes, many residents are left wondering when and if they'll be able to return. It's exposed a town grappling with poverty and housing issues. Samantha G has more.
Westport man Pat Cote was lying on the couch watching a movie when he noticed his jandals float past him during the deluge in July. He'd seen the water accumulating, but thought it might rain itself out. He'd put a roast in the oven and gone back to watching Lord of the Rings. But the rain kept falling and later washed through his Peel Street rental, ultimately destroying all his belongings. The house was yellow stickered and needs the walls and floor replaced. It's been stripped, but the repair work is yet to start.
Well, I was told at probably Christmas, and I said, oh, that's only a couple of months away, and I said, no, 2022. So it could be then and a bit more.
Pat Cote is now in temporary accommodation, a unit the size of his old lounge, in a complex he shares with 12 others. His furniture and whiteware had to be disposed of, and he's been left with only his clothes.
I couldn't afford a content insurance, but normally I would have it, but being on the benefit, not enough to pay for it. But then, wish I did have it.
Pat Cote says he'll stick it out until after Christmas, then look for something else. But there isn't much out there. A Trade Me search shows there are currently 3 houses available for rent in Westport, which is home to about 5,000 people. He says if he can't find somewhere else to live, he'll think about leaving town. Most days he's been at Shop Zero on Westport's main street. An initiative started by Nuku's Makairi Clarkson Steel with the support of other agencies, it's helping to support those affected by the floods. It's given out 450 packages of donated goods, but it's also had to help people cope in the aftermath.
What we've been dealing with at Shop Zero is the mental state of the people, the hini ngaro, which has been a result of the floods or isolation because of lockdown and COVID. We've personally had to deal with a couple high-risk situations of well-being. It's been massive, the effect when people break down.
It's also shone a light on the need in Westport.
It's the insurance and the uninsured that has kind of been highlighted as well. And it really shows that Westport was already in poverty and behind closed doors, but the flood highlighted it publicly.
Bulla Mayor Jamie Klein says about 100 of the flood-affected residents in Westport had no insurance. A recent outreach operation saw community navigators visit all of the red and yellow sticker homes to check in on residents.
There was sort of a multiple reason for that project was to obviously identify people that haven't presented in terms of needing assistance. So it was a bit of a check on that psychosocial, people that are struggling at home, that sort of stuff. But it identified a number of people living in situations that are just really not sustainable, given what we kind of know that this is going to be 12 months or more.
It highlighted that some were living in mouldy homes without proper cooking facilities or access to showers.
So that was a good project to identify that level of need, get more of a handle on it and making sure that the support that is available is actually getting to the right people. Social
and Welfare Recovery Manager Shane Barry says a number of community connectors have recently been hired and will be coordinated by Māori health provider Putini Waiora to support affected residents. She says they'll be the conduit for a number of community groups doing amazing mahi as Westport recovers.
We've got a lot of people who've asked for that help, that support, and so they'll just be out there kind of helping people navigate their way through paperwork, connecting them to the right agencies for support, and just they'll be, I guess, our measure going forward of how we're coping.
She says they'll be the conduit for a number of community groups that are doing amazing mahi as Westport recovers.
It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A homeless advocate hopes health authorities listen to those on the front line about the best way to reach at-risk communities for vaccination. In April, Te Tuinga Whānau's Trust, Tommy Karpai Wilson, travelled from Tauranga Moana to Wellington to pitch his idea for a jab cab to the Ministry of Health officials, similar to the Shopbro buses that rolled out in Tamaki Makaurau months later. The vans would have provided transport to and from a COVID vaccine clinic. While the wheels never got turning on the jab cab, Tommy Wilson hopes the government learns a thing or two. Jean Bell reports.
The jab cab idea Tommy Karpai Wilson pitched to Ministry of Health officials was aimed at getting the vaccine to the people.
How do we reach the homeless or the gangs who we deal with on a daily basis here? We deal with 200 families and every gang chapter is represented in our staff just about. So, I was taking a message down there based around what we called the jab cab.
He says Dr Ashley Bloomfield and Director General of Māori Health, Dr John Whanga, were keen on the idea. But when it came to the nitty-gritty, support petered out. While Mr Wilson is disappointed the wheels got turning on the Shopbro buses in Auckland while his jab cab hissed flat, he thinks it highlights the importance of getting on people's level in order to reach them.
Don't want to be an auntie whinger. It's not about what we missed out on, but how can we capitalise and utilise it going forward for whatever comes our way, whether it's a virus, a pandemic, poverty pandemic, It's about how are we languagising it and who best is qualified to put that language in the right context.
Across at Takitimu House, a homeless men's shelter in Tauranga Moana, time and trust have been key to getting clients fully vaxxed. Of the 40 men on the shelter's books, nearly all are double jabbed. That's thanks to the tireless work of Operations Manager Anna Marie Angus.
We've also been going around to all the clients that we've housed over the years and taking them in for walk-in vaccinations to make sure that our whole client group everyone that's come into contact with us, given we know that they're vulnerable, has access to vaccine.
Some were hesitant or staunchly against getting vaccinated at first, but she used every opportunity possible to get them on board. In one instance, she spent 4 hours with a client discussing his concerns.
Talking to them about it, showing them things on our computer, whether that be, videos of families that have been through COVID-19, and then offering them ways to get the vaccination or answering other questions or getting other people, Kaumātua, our cultural worker here. So it's very individual in my view.
Tommy Wilson says it's a work in progress getting some families across the line.
If I looked at our clientele, I'd be scratching to say it was 50-50, probably maybe 30-70 still haven't been vaccinated. I think they are looking to us as their closest allies, friends. What are we doing? And we'll follow, And so we have to. It takes a lot of kai and a lot of cup of teas and a lot of kōrero.
The Ministry of Health's Vince Barry, who is in charge of optimising delivery of the COVID vaccine, told RNZ in a statement they've received a huge number of suggestions, along with lots of constructive feedback. His words have been voiced.
Even if it hasn't been possible to act on all these ideas, it's great to know that people are backing the push to get vaccinations to as many Kiwis as possible.
Vince Barry says DHBs are working to make testing and vaccination available to homeless and transitional housing clients.
In just a few months, COVID vaccine mandates have quickly become a familiar response to the pandemic. Western Australia is the latest to make vaccination compulsory for a large chunk of its workforce before it opens its borders. The ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
First, it was health and aged care workers. Then police, teachers, truckies, tradies and miners, airline staff and workers in some of the country's biggest businesses. Mandatory COVID vaccines in the government and private sectors have multiplied across the country.
I suppose if you were to blink and kind of find yourself a few months ago when we had vaccine shortages, it was kind of hard to imagine this moment.
Dr Katie Atwell is an expert in mandatory vaccination policy with the University of Western Australia. She says while workers and customers in the midst of the New South Wales and Victorian outbreaks have had to get vaccinated to be allowed to reopen, Western Australia's vaccine mandate, announced yesterday, is more far-reaching because it'll cover 3/4 of the state's workforce. Even staff at petrol stations and hardware stores are targeted.
The NT seems to have done something similar, and they are the only other state to have moved in a serious way towards mandating mainstream occupations. So the NT jumped first, WA's jumped large and jumped second. It appears that Queensland, South Australia and Tassie are still kind of treading along without adopting widespread mandates.
Associate Professor Maria O'Sullivan, who's a senior law lecturer at Monash University, is surprised by how many workers are now being obliged to get vaccinated. But she thinks the mandates are on solid legal ground.
Holistically, I think what we've done in Australia with vaccine mandates is legally justifiable. I think we just do have to be careful about both direct and indirect discrimination.
So how much are the mandates responsible for Australia reaching the milestone of having 70% of over 16s fully vaccinated? Dr Katie Atwell says it's hard to say.
We have the crisis obviously in New South Wales and Victoria where they've been in lockdowns, where they've actually been eye to eye with the COVID pandemic. Last night I had dinner with my friend from Geelong who's a GP and is working over here in Western Australia for a little while. And it was honestly like comparing notes from being in two different zones, her coming out of a war zone and me having been somewhere down the track, behind peaceful lines, and what different experiences we've had just within our one country. So I think to say how we got to 70%, which of course is an enormous achievement, we've certainly had a range of inputs and mandates would be part of that mix.
The next question is how long should the vaccine mandates remain in force? Associate Professor Maria O'Sullivan would like to see a sunset clause.
Any sort of limitation of human rights is always going to be more grounded and more verifiable and lawful if it has a time limitation. But to be honest, I just don't know what's going to happen next year. They might have to extend that even further. It will just depend. But yes, it is more justifiable if it has some sort of time limit.
But Dr Katie Atwell cautions against doing that.
I think one of the issues you face from making something mandatory to then removing it to being voluntary is you can send a message that something is no longer important. So, for example, we all wear seatbelts. You don't get in the car and whip on your seatbelt because you think a cop's going to look in the window. You just do it now because it's second nature. But if our authorities were suddenly to say, right, well, everyone's doing the right thing and putting their seatbelts on, we don't think you need to be treated like children and we'll take away that law now, I think that would communicate a message to us that we don't need to keep doing it.
COVID put a dampener on much of the usual pomp and ceremony for the swearing-in of the new Governor-General, Dame Cindy Kero, at Parliament today. Absent this time, the hundreds-strong greeting line, military salute and inspection of the Guard. Hamish Cardwell reports.
To the sound of karakia and haka, Dame Cindy Kero climbed Parliament's front steps and into the history books. Of Ngāpuhi, Ngāti Hine and Ngāti Kahu descent, she today became the first Wahine Māori to be Governor-General. In the ornate wood and marble Legislative Council chamber, she swore 2 oaths at a table ringed with lush ferns. She wore an elegant Māori cloak over a regal gold coat with embroidered crimson trim, accessorised with a matching COVID-19 face mask and a heru hair comb. Reciting the oaths in both English and te reo, Dame Cindy said she was proud to bring her dual Māori British heritage to the role, and that she would be Governor-General for all New Zealanders, guided by 3 principles.
The first is kaitiakitanga, that we are temporary guardians of things that are precious to us and have a responsibility to look after them for future generations. Second is oranga, preserving the health, vitality and well-being of living things. The third is manaakitanga, and that is our duty to care for others and to uphold their mana, to respect them and to look after them.
Most recently the Chief Executive of the Royal Society, she's been a Children's Commissioner and Pro-Vice-Chancellor Māori at the University of Auckland. Dame Cindy says COVID has highlighted the importance of research and expertise.
It has never been more important to critically evaluate the constant flood of information across our screens and to value the ability of expert communicators who can help to alleviate our uncertainties and fears.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says Dame Cindy understands deeply the role of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. She hopes having a wahine toa occupying such an important role will inspire many.
You've set an example of where a life of service can lead, and hopefully, when others follow your footsteps, they won't be quite as surprised as you were when I asked you to consider the role.
Jacinda Ardern spoke of Dame Cindy's passion and dedication.
I can recall well the first time that I met Dame Cindy. It was at Massey University, and I had sought her out knowing her extensive background in child wellbeing and hoping she would indulge me. Alongside her patience in response to my many questions, it was Dame Cindy's compassion, knowledge and focus that stood out to me.
After the ceremony, Dame Cindy's younger brother Gordon Simpson told RNZ the whole whānau are very proud.
Very well appointed. Jacinda's made a very good decision.
You'd have to say that. Okay, what can you tell me about her? What was she like when she was younger?
She was always a hard worker. She was always caring. She was a very nice sister.
Former Governors-General Sir Jerry Mataparai and Sir Anand Sachinand were also full of praise.
With her background, both personal and professional, and her empathy for New Zealanders, I think it's an inspired choice.
Any words of advice for her?
Not at all.
I wouldn't provide advice, but I think the wairua of this morning's ceremony with the Governor-General's easy assumption of office augurs well for her term.
From Parliament, the new Governor-General was whisked off to lay a wreath at the Pukeahu National War Memorial. There were prayers, a song, a minute's silence, and the last post. Dame Cindy takes over from Dame Patsy Reddy for a 5-year term.
And we've had so much feedback on our interview with Moira Spear, who's desperate to get to Auckland to see her 36-year-old nephew who's got terminal bowel cancer and has days to live. She's had 2 exemptions rejected and other attempts and applications made for an exemption rejected through helpers as well. This listener says, the interview you just had with the woman wanting to go and support her nephew made me cry. It highlights to me the necessity we have now for a much more nuanced system to assess the potential risks of people moving around the country. In this case, I see no risk whatsoever to any member of the public. I agree with her that the mental health fallout of this one-size-fits-all current level system will be immense. Delta changes everything. We need to be more nimble and sensible and caring so that people are free to do what they need to for others. John reckons it's an outrage that MB won't allow Moira to travel to Auckland to assist her dying nephew. These heartless, unempathetic officials continue to perpetuate such pain and distress. They are unfit for their positions and should all be immediately sacked. Another listener says, I guess one needs to know how many compassionate exemptions are sought daily to get a perspective here. If hundreds a day, it could be highly risky, and allowing one sets a precedent, but if only a few, it seems cruel. The line does have to be drawn somewhere. Julia says it seems to be so many irrational decisions being made on applications to cross the border. They defy simple logic. It is very disturbing knowing these decision makers have so much power, so little common sense. And just a reminder there, Moira wants a one-way pass. She wants to come into Auckland and is prepared to stay until the level shift in the border around Auckland goes, but no joy so far. That's about all we've got time for this evening. Thank you so much for all your feedback. Sorry we couldn't get to it all. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up. First Up's in Murupara, where vaccination rates are the lowest in the country, and one kaumatua is openly rejecting government advice to get vaccinated. You will not want to miss this piece. Have a great night. Checkpoint team back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Deputy Prime Minister says while more cases are likely to emerge in Waikato, he believes it's still possible to contain